My name is Josephine Calder. Everyone who matters to the United States Army calls me General Calder. Everyone who used to matter to me calls me Joe when they bother to call me anything at all. 25 years of service, 4 overseas deployments, a career built one silent, unglamorous year at a time inside the finance corps where nobody hands you a medal for catching a rounding error that would have cost the government $11 million. And nobody writes a headline about the woman who kept the money honest while other people were busy getting famous for other things. I made Brigadier General 18 months ago, 1 star. Earned slowly, the way everything in my life has been earned. To my family, I was still just the quiet one, the one who missed Christmas dinners for field exercises, the one who never had a husband to bring home, never had children to show off in a school photo, never had anything they could hold up at a dinner party and say, "Look what our daughter accomplished." I had classified commendations instead of magazine features. I had the respect of men and women who would follow me into places most people can't find on a map. It never seemed to be enough currency to spend at my mother's table. The last time I sat across from my parents, my mother poured herself a second glass of wine without asking anyone if they wanted one and said almost gently, like she was doing me a favor by saying it out loud instead of just thinking it, well, at least Meredith will be the one taking care of us when we're old. My father nodded. Not like it was cruel, like it was simply true, the way the sky is blue. My sister Meredith didn't say anything. She just smiled the polished smile that had won her scholarships and a full ride to medical school. The smile that made professors remember her name. I didn't respond. Some battles aren't worth starting in someone else's dining room. I finished my water, said I had an early flight, and I left. I told myself it wouldn't sting. It stung anyway. It wasn't always like that between us. I remember being 9 years old, showing my father a science fair ribbon, second place, not first, but I'd built a working model of a hydraulic lift out of syringes and tubing, and I'd been proud of it in the uncomplicated way children are proud of things before the world teaches them to measure pride against other people's trophies. He'd looked at it for maybe 4 seconds before asking whether Meredith's piano recital started at 6 or 6:30. I don't think he meant it as cruelty. I think, in his mind, some children were simply the kind you invested in, and some were the kind you assumed would take care of themselves. I became very good, very early, at taking care of myself. The Army noticed that about me before my own family did. A recruiter at a college fair once told me I had the kind of quiet that makes people trust you with things. I didn't understand what he meant until years later, standing in a briefing room at 2 in the morning while colonels twice my age waited for me to finish an audit they didn't have the patience to do themselves. Discipline became the language I was fluent in when my family's language, performance, applause, being seen, never quite fit my mouth. After that dinner, I stopped showing up. Not dramatically. I never announced it, never sent an angry letter. I just let the invitations arrive and let them go unanswered more often than not. Deployments made it easy to disappear inside my own excuse. Nobody in my family ever asked what those deployments cost me. They only asked, eventually, if I might be free for the holidays. I usually wasn't. There's a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't look like crying in your car or staring at old photographs. It looks like getting very efficient at being alone. It looks like learning to schedule your own birthday around nothing because nobody else is scheduling around it either. So when I heard through an aunt who still kept me on her mailing list that Meredith was about to complete her cardiology residency, chief resident no less, the youngest in the hospital's history to hold the title, some old stubborn part of me wanted to be there. Not for my parents, for her. Whatever had grown crooked between the rest of us, Meredith had been a little girl once who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long car rides. Before the distance calcified into something neither of us knew how to name, I decided to go, alone, unannounced. No uniform, just a charcoal blazer and slacks, my hair pinned back, my rank invisible to anyone who didn't already know to look for it. I booked a hotel 2 miles from the hospital instead of staying with my parents, told myself it was about the early flight out the next morning, and knew somewhere underneath that excuse, it was really about not wanting to sit at their table again before I'd even seen my sister graduate. I didn't expect the day to end with a helicopter. The night before the ceremony, I ordered room service. I barely touched and sat by the window, running through the speech I wasn't going to give, the one where I told Meredith privately, quietly, how proud I actually was, without it turning into a performance for our parents to grade. I fell asleep somewhere in the middle of rehearsing a sentence I never got the chance to say out loud. My aide, Captain Ruth Alvarez, called my cell at 11:40, which was already strange because Ruth never called after 9 unless something was actually wrong. Ruth had been with me for 2 years, a young logistics officer with a memory like a filing cabinet and an instinct for trouble that I'd learned, the hard way, never to second guess. "Ma'am," she said, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully, the way she does when she's not sure yet whether something is a problem or a false alarm. "I need to flag something. It's probably nothing." "Go ahead. Your PKI credentials pinged an authorization request tonight. Finance system, not personnel. I checked. Your card's logged as inactive, hasn't left its holder. I confirmed that with you myself before you left for the trip. But the system shows an approval attempt using your digital signature about 40 minutes ago. Small dollar amount. Almost nothing, honestly, if it were a one-time thing." I sat up in the hotel bed. "Where?" "Still tracing it. Could be a glitch in the new authentication rollout, ma'am. I've seen worse from that software before." She didn't sound convinced of her own reassurance. Neither was I. Ruth doesn't call at midnight over glitches. She calls at midnight when something in her gut is already 3 steps ahead of what she can prove. Keep tracing it. Flag it to compliance in the morning. I'm not going to let it ruin my sister's day. Understood, ma'am. I'll call the second I know something. And, ma'am, for what it's worth, congratulations to your sister. I hope you get one day where you're just somebody's family and not somebody's general." That almost undid me more than the phone call itself. "Thank you, Ruth. Get some sleep." I told myself it was probably nothing, the way you tell yourself a chest pain is probably just tightness from the flight. I wanted badly for it to be nothing. I had one day I wanted to spend as somebody's sister, not somebody's general. I should have known better. I always know better. I just don't always listen to myself. The hospital's atrium had been dressed up for the occasion. White orchids on every table, a small stage with a podium, rows of folding chairs filled with residents in crisp white coats, and families in their best clothes. Somewhere near the front, a string quartet made up of hospital volunteers played something soft and forgettable while people found their seats. I arrived early and took a seat near the back, close to the wall, where the morning light came in low through the tall windows. 3 rows ahead of me, I spotted them. My father, Walter, sitting the way he always sits, spine straight, chin slightly lifted, like he's perpetually being photographed for something. My mother, Diane, in a cream suit, dabbing at eyes that weren't actually crying yet, just anticipating the need to. They looked from the back like the kind of family that had never once had a fracture in it. Polished, patient, exactly the picture they'd always wanted strangers to see. I heard my mother lean toward the woman beside her and say, in that soft, performative voice she uses when she wants to be overheard, "Meredith was always the one with promise." Not like some others who chose other paths. My father chuckled low. "She'll be the one taking care of us. Watch." They didn't know I was 3 rows behind them. 25 years of learning not to flinch came in useful. I folded my hands in my lap and let their words move through me like weather. I thought not for the first time that there is a particular skill to sitting still while people you love describe a version of you that only exists in their imagination. The version who chose distance because she didn't care, instead of the version who chose distance because caring at their table had always cost more than she could afford. I opened the program in my lap. My name wasn't printed anywhere in it, not in the acknowledgments, not among the family listed beside Meredith's biography, which read, "Dr. Meredith Calder is the proud daughter of Walter and Diane Calder of the Calder Family Scholarship Fund." There was no mention of a sister. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself a lot of things that morning that turned out not to be true. Then the hospital administrator stepped up to the podium and called her name. Dr. Meredith Calder, Chief Cardiology Resident, graduating with distinction. Applause rippled through the room. My father stood halfway out of his seat to clap. My mother touched the pearls at her throat. Meredith walked up in her white coat, composed, radiant, exactly the way she'd looked her entire life, like someone the world had already decided to be proud of. Applause rippled through the room. My father stood halfway out of his seat to clap. My mother touched the pearls at her throat. Meredith walked up in her white coat, composed, radiant, exactly the way she'd looked her entire life, like someone the world had already decided to be proud of. She said a few brief words about mentors and long call nights and the patients who taught her more than any textbook, and I found myself smiling without meaning to, forgetting for a moment. everything that had ever gone wrong between us. My phone buzzed once in my jacket pocket. Then again, I glanced down. Ruth, 3 missed calls, 1 text, calling me now, not a glitch. I stepped quietly toward the side exit, phone already at my ear, my heart already picking up speed before I understood why. Ma'am. Ruth's voice was tight, fast, none of the careful hedging from the night before. The authorization went through. Somebody used your digital signature to approve a transfer request through Anchor Point Logistics Group. A shell contractor DCIS has been quietly investigating for over a year on an unrelated matter. It's staged. There's a second much larger transfer scheduled to clear in under an hour. And the new authentication protocol needs live biometric confirmation from you specifically to finalize the freeze, which means whoever's running this either has a workaround we don't know about yet, or they're counting on you never finding out in time to stop it. My stomach dropped somewhere near my boots. Get Colonel Yates, I said, already moving, already scanning the room for the nearest exit that wouldn't draw attention. Now. Already did, ma'am. He's airborne, 15 minutes out. He needs you at the extraction point outside the hospital, not inside. Biometric console's mobile. It's built into the vehicle. Ma'am, I'm sorry. I know today wasn't supposed to be this. It's not your fault, Ruth. Just get me the console. I stood very still in that hallway hospital light, humming overhead, my sister's laughter drifting faintly through the doors behind me, and I understood, with the particular calm that only comes after you've stopped being surprised by how ugly people can be, that someone I probably knew had been wearing my name like a mask and had chosen of all days to let the mask slip on this one. I didn't go back inside. I walked out to the parking structure, and 11 minutes later, I heard it before I saw it, the low shudder of rotor blades cutting the morning air, growing from a rumor into a roar. A UH-60 Blackhawk descended over the open lot beside the ambulance bay, its downwash flattening the ornamental grass, scattering a stack of paper programs someone had left on a bench. People spilled out of the hospital doors to see what the commotion was. I recognized some of the faces from the ceremony. I recognized my father's, going pale. The side door slid open. Colonel Marcus Yates jumped down before the skids had fully settled, already moving toward me, tablet in hand. General Calder. He didn't waste words. We need your authorization to freeze the account before the second transfer clears. Biometric scan. Right here, right now. I pressed my thumb to the reader. The screen blinked green. Freeze initiated. Pending confirming outer. Confirmed, Marcus said into his radio. Accounts locked. Only then did I let myself breathe. Only then did I look up and see my father standing at the edge of the crowd, my mother beside him, and Meredith, still in her white coat. Bouquet forgotten somewhere behind her, staring at me like she was seeing a stranger wearing her sister's face. Joe? Meredith's voice barely carried over the dying whine of the rotors. What is happening? I didn't answer her yet. I didn't have an answer that wouldn't break something. Fort Meade smelled the way it always smelled. Gravel, diesel, and the particular order of a place where everything has a procedure. I arrived the next morning with no fanfare, just the residue of yesterday's chaos still clinging to me like static, and a phone full of unanswered texts from a mother who wanted to know why I'd left before the reception photos. Marcus was waiting in the command wing, a folder already open on the table, thicker than I expected. Marcus Yates and I had served together during a deployment that neither of us talks about at dinner parties, the kind of shared history that means we don't need to perform politeness with each other anymore. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him, a little more gray at the temples, but he still carried that clipped precision I'd trusted my life to more than once. You made the local news, he said, without judgment, sliding a printed article across to me. Hospital graduation, interrupted by military helicopter landing. I didn't plan to, I know, but you're going to want to sit down for this part. I didn't sit. Marcus let it go and walked me through it standing up, the way he knows I prefer bad news delivered, fast, without cushioning. He walked me through it. 10 years ago, before my second deployment, I'd signed a limited power of attorney authorizing my father to manage a handful of domestic matters, a storage unit, lease a car title transfer, small things. Standard practice for a lot of deploying soldiers who don't want their lives falling apart while they're overseas. It was supposed to expire after 90 days. I remembered signing it at my kitchen table the night before I flew out, distracted, half-packed, trusting the man across from me because he was my father and because it had never once occurred to me. At that point in my life, that trust was something that could be quietly stretched past its expiration date and used against me. It never expired, Marcus said. Somebody altered the scope and duration on file with the forged amendment, broadened it considerably, added financial and contractual authority that was never part of the original document, used it along with a replayed digital signature pulled from an old signed contract to authorize a string of vendor agreements with Anchor Point Logistics Group starting in 2018. Anchor Point, I flagged them in a 2019 audit. Overbilling on fuel logistics contracts out of Djibouti. I wrote 3 pages on that company personally. I know, that memo's in the file. Marcus's jaw tightened. Somebody reopened dealings with them under your authority 2 years after you tried to shut them down. Either whoever did this didn't know about your audit, which seems unlikely given how close to you they were, or they knew exactly what it meant and used your own name to quietly override it. He turned the folder toward me, tapping a printed ledger dense with dates and dollar amounts. Structured transactions, staggered under the mandatory reporting threshold, spread across 5 fiscal years. Nothing large enough on its own to trip an automatic audit flag. Total exposure near as compliance can calculate so far, $15.4 million. My spine went rigid. How does something that size move for 5 years without anyone catching it? Slowly? Carefully? By someone who understood exactly how not to get caught and who had enough proximity to you to make the paper trail look plausible on the surface. Marcus hesitated in a way that told me the worst part was still coming. He slid one more page across the table, and this time he didn't tap it. He just let it sit there, waiting for me to look. This account was opened in 2018. Secondary beneficiary listed on the paperwork. I looked down. Meredith Calder. The breath left me like it had been physically pulled out. She may not have known any of this, Marcus said quickly, watching my face carefully, the way he watches soldiers when he's checking whether they're about to break or hold. She'd have been 17 when the account opened. It's listed as an educational trust, guardian manage. She wouldn't have needed to sign a thing for someone else to put her name on the paperwork. But whoever built this, they were inside your life, Joe. Close enough to know your family, your paperwork, your blind spots. Close enough to know exactly which name would make an auditor's eyes slide right past a red flag. I turned away from the table, one hand braced against the windowsill, watching soldiers jog across the quad like the morning was still ordinary for somebody. 25 years, and I had never once imagined my own family's name working against me instead of alongside me. I need a lawyer. Already called one. Naomi Cross. Former JAG, now civilian, she specializes in identity theft cases involving service members. Handled 2 similar cases out of Bragg last year. Both resulted in convictions. She's sharp, and she's fast. Good. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Because this isn't paperwork anymore. This is war. Marcus almost smiled at that, the first almost smile since I'd walked in. Figured you'd say that. She's already cleared to review the case file. She'll be here by 2. Naomi arrived that afternoon rain-damp and entirely unbothered by it and unpacked her briefcase across the conference table like she was laying out surgical instruments, folders in one precise row, a laptop angled just so. A legal pad already covered in her own shorthand from the drive over. She was younger than I expected for someone with her reputation. Sharp-eyed, and she shook my hand with the brisk efficiency of someone who didn't believe in wasting the first 5 minutes of a meeting on pleasantries. I've been through what DCIS forwarded, she said, no preamble. This isn't sloppy misuse, this is engineered fraud, and it's good, which almost never happens by accident. Whoever built this understood exactly which systems wouldn't cross-check each other. She pulled up an image on her laptop, an enlarged signature beneath a digital header, the pixels blown up until the loops of my own name looked almost unfamiliar. This isn't a scanned signature. It's a replayed cryptographic signature lifted from a document you legitimately signed years ago and reattached to new files. That's a federal violation on its own. Unauthorized access to a protected computer system, Title 18, Section 1030. Combine it with the forged amendment to your power of attorney, and we're looking at aggravated identity theft under Section 1028A, on top of the underlying fraud charges tied to the contracts themselves. Who has access to something old enough to replay? I asked, though some part of me already knew the shape of the answer even before I let myself say it out loud. That's not a stranger. That's someone who's had years inside my paperwork. Someone who knew which drawer to look in. Naomi's eyes flicked toward the folder, toward the name on the beneficiary line, and then, more carefully, toward me. I have to ask you something, and I need you to actually think about it before you answer out of loyalty instead of fact. Who managed your paperwork while you were overseas? Who had physical access to your files, your old contracts, anything with a signature already on it? I already knew. I'd known since Marcus showed me the power of attorney sitting there in black and white with a signature date that predated a deployment I remembered leaving for like it was yesterday. I just hadn't let myself say it out loud yet because saying it made it real in a way that reading it on a page hadn't quite managed. My father. Naomi nodded slowly, like she'd expected that answer, and had been waiting, with more patience than I deserved, for me to arrive at it myself instead of being told. Then that's where we start. I won't sugarcoat this for you, General. Cases involving family members are harder, not easier. Juries assume complicated emotional history means complicated motive, and defense counsel will absolutely use that. But the paper doesn't care about family. The paper only cares about what it shows, and right now what it shows is damning. Then let's find more paper, I said. She almost smiled. That's exactly the attitude I was hoping for. I drove to my parents' house that evening without calling ahead. My mother answered the door already halfway into an excuse about the mess, then stopped when she saw my face. Whatever she read there was enough to make her step back and let me in without her usual commentary about how long it had been since my last visit. Your father's in his study, she said quietly. Jody, is everything all right? You look. I need to talk to him, I said. Alone, if that's all right. She hesitated, then nodded, and retreated toward the kitchen with the particular stillness of a woman who has learned, over many years of marriage, exactly when not to ask questions she doesn't want the answers to. My father was in his study, a glass of water sweating on the desk in front of him, a stack of financial paperwork spread out that he closed a little too quickly when I walked in. I sat down across from him without being invited to. I need to ask you about a power of attorney I signed 10 years ago, I said. Before my second deployment, the limited one. Storage unit, car title, 90 days. He didn't look up right away. He straightened the papers he'd just closed, aligning their edges with more attention than the task required. That's old business, Josephine. Nothing to dredge up. Dredge up what? I kept my voice level, watching him the way I'd learned to watch men in briefing rooms who were deciding, in real time, how much of the truth they could afford to give away. Because I think it's exactly time we did. I think you know exactly what I'm about to ask you, and I think you've been rehearsing an answer for it for longer than just today. He reached for the water glass. His fingers trembled just slightly, barely visible unless you'd spent 2 decades learning to read the smallest tells in a room full of people who didn't want to be read. He took a sip he didn't need, buying himself a few seconds. I let the silence stretch until it did the work for me. It always does eventually. People fill silence with confession far more often than they fill it with denial, if you just let it sit there long enough. You don't understand the pressures I was under, he said finally. Quiet, almost rehearsed, like a man reading a statement he drafted and redrafted in his head for years without ever expecting to have to say it out loud. The business was struggling, badly. Right around the time you left, I had opportunities. I had access because of you that I didn't have on my own. Doors that opened because of your clearance, your reputation. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I'd unwind it before you ever needed to know. Access, I repeated, and something in my chest went very cold and very still. You mean my name? You mean 20 years of my life, reduced to a set of doors you could open without asking? He didn't answer that. He didn't have to. He looked, for the first time in my adult life, like a man who understood he had run out of room to maneuver. Did Meredith know? I asked. Any of it, ever, no. That answer came fast, immediate, the first thing he'd said all evening without hesitation. Never. She has nothing to do with this. Her name is on an account, Dad. His face went slack in a way I'd never seen before, not fear for himself but something closer to it, the dawning understanding that whatever he'd told himself this arrangement was, it had never stayed as contained as he promised himself it would. I stood up before he could try to make any of it sound smaller than it was. I hope the water helps, I said. You're going to need a clear head. This isn't going away because I left the room. Back at Naomi's office over the following week, the conference room had become what she called the war table, 2 whiteboards covered in dates, arrows, contract numbers, a growing wall of exhibits pinned in careful rows. I spent evenings there after my regular duty hours, standing in front of those boards the way I used to stand in front of operational maps, trying to find the pattern hiding underneath the chaos. "We're close," Naomi said one evening, capping her marker. Priya Nair agreed to meet. She was Anchor Point's senior accountant until she left the firm 2 years ago, resigned, according to her, because she didn't like what she was being asked to quietly sign off on. She kept copies of the original paperwork. Apparently she's been sitting on a storage box of it for 2 years, half hoping and half dreading that someone would eventually come asking. Including the facts. "Including the facts," Naomi confirmed with a smile that had no warmth in it at all. "Sent from your father's home office, with your signature already attached, dated 3 days before the meeting it was supposedly authorizing even occurred." Marcus leaned forward, flipping to a tabbed page in his own copy of the file. "She says she once asked your father directly whether the authorization had been confirmed with you personally. According to her notes from that call, he told her it was already cleared, above her pay grade, and that questioning it further wouldn't be good for her position at the firm. She'll testify?" "She's scared," Naomi said. "This isn't a small thing to put your name to against a man who clearly has resources and lawyers. But yes, she's willing." We met Priya that same week in a quiet downtown conference room, gray afternoon light coming through the blinds in stripes across the table. She came in carrying an old laptop and a stack of manila folders, her hands trembling slightly around the handle, her voice steadier than her hands. "I don't know General Calder personally," she said, sitting down across from me, glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite place, something between apology and relief. "But I know someone stole her name and made me a part of it without ever asking. I thought about that for 2 years. I used to lie awake wondering whose life I'd helped hollow out without knowing their face." She laid out fax logs, financial entries, metadata timestamps, one document at a time, narrating each as she went, her professional training clearly kicking in and steadying her even as her personal nerves stayed visible underneath it. "The dates match my deployment records almost perfectly. Documents signed and dated on days I could prove through Army travel logs and even a boarding pass I still had saved in an old email. That I had been on the other side of the world, nowhere near a fax machine or a notary." "They backdated some of these," Naomi murmured, scanning the pages, holding two side by side under the light. "Old trick. Sign it later, stamp it earlier so the timeline looks clean to anyone who isn't cross-referencing it against something external like travel records." Priya wiped at her eyes quickly, embarrassed by it, waving a hand like she could brush the emotion away before anyone noticed. "I have a daughter about your sister's age," she said to me, quiet. 19. I kept thinking about that the whole drive here, about what it would mean if someone did this to her before she even understood what a signature was worth, before she'd had the chance to learn that her own name was something worth protecting. "You didn't do this," I told her. "You're the reason we can prove who did." She looked at me like she hadn't expected to be told that, and something in her shoulders loosened. Naomi was already building the federal complaint, flipping between exhibits with the focus of someone assembling a puzzle she could already see the finished shape of. "We have 5 pillars now. Forged signature, verified through replay analysis. Unauthorized computer system access. The beneficiary trail connecting the funds to your family directly. Whistleblower testimony from Ms. Nair. And a deployment record that makes it physically, provably impossible for the general to have signed any of this herself." I stepped up to the whiteboard and wrote one name at the top. Beneath all the arrows and dates, my handwriting steadier than I expected it to be given how my hands had felt all week. "Walter Calder." Naomi exhaled, like something had finally locked into place after weeks of pieces refusing to sit flush against each other. "That's the last piece we needed cleanly documented. We're ready to refer this to the U.S. Attorney's Office." I didn't smile. But somewhere behind my ribs, something that had been clenched for a very long time, longer maybe than just these past 2 weeks, loosened just slightly, like a fist finally allowed to unclench after holding a position for far too long. 2 weeks later, my mother called to invite me to a gala. Meredith was being honored by the hospital foundation. Rising star in cardiology, a black tie fundraiser, my father listed as a major benefactor thanks to a scholarship fund bearing the family name. My mother's voice on the phone was carefully bright, the way it always was when she wanted something from me without asking for it directly. "It would mean so much to your sister if you came, Joe. And it might be good, honestly, for people to see that this family still shows up for each other. I almost laughed at that, though nothing about it was funny. I almost didn't go at all. Naomi had told me the case was heading toward a grand jury referral within days, and showing up anywhere near my father felt like walking into a room with a live wire, uncertain when or how it might arc. But I thought about Meredith standing on that stage again, still unaware that her name sat quietly inside a federal fraud file, still unaware that the very scholarship her own father had funded, the one she'd thanked him for publicly more than once in interviews and acceptance speeches, might be sitting on stolen money. She deserved to hear it from me, before she heard it from a subpoena. Or worse, from a reporter looking for a quote. I wore my dress blues that night, not the blazer I'd worn to the graduation. I wasn't hiding anymore. If my father wanted to stand in a ballroom built partly on my stolen name, he was going to do it in front of someone wearing the rank he'd tried to spend without permission. I found Meredith near the edge of the ballroom, away from the noise, still in the pale blue gown she'd worn on stage 20 minutes earlier, a glass of champagne untouched in her hand. "Joe?" She looked surprised, and then, immediately, wary. We hadn't really spoken since the parking lot, since the helicopter, since the moment her whole understanding of her sister had been rewritten in under a minute. "I didn't think you'd come, especially not in uniform. I needed to tell you something before it becomes public," I said. "Before you hear it from someone else, or read it somewhere that doesn't give you the chance to ask questions." Her expression tightened. "This is about the account, isn't it? The one from the parking lot." "Yes." I kept my voice low, steady, the way I'd learned to deliver bad news to soldiers without letting my own fear leak into it. I told her as gently as the facts would allow, about the account opened in her name when she was 17. About the trust that was never really a trust, guardian managed by a man who'd never once asked her permission to put her name where it didn't belong. About a father who had used both of us, in different ways, for the same theft, me as a name to forge, her as a name to hide behind. Meredith's face went through something complicated. Disbelief, then a kind of vertigo, like the floor of her whole childhood had just tilted underneath her without warning. "That scholarship fund," she whispered, her hand tightening around the champagne glass until I worried it might crack. "The one that paid for half my tuition, the one I thanked him for at my white coat ceremony. In front of everyone. I don't know yet exactly how much of it traces back to the fraud," I said. "The forensic accountants are still working through it. But I think you deserved to know before you stood up there again tonight and thanked him for something that might not have been his to give." She was quiet for a long moment, staring past me at the crowd, at our father laughing warmly with a cluster of donors near the stage, performing the exact version of himself that had fooled both of us for most of our lives, just in different ways. "I kept telling myself he finally believed in me," she said, very quietly. "That the money meant something, that it was proof. It might still mean something," I said, "just not what you thought." Across the room, I saw my father notice us talking, watched him excuse himself from the donors, his expression sliding smoothly into something practiced and warm, the version of himself he performed for rooms exactly like this one. He reached us just as Marcus, who I hadn't even realized was nearby, quietly positioned near the bar the entire evening watching the way he'd once watched a perimeter, stepped into the small circle we'd formed, a folded document in hand. "Mr. Calder," Marcus said, low enough not to carry across the ballroom, but clear enough that Walter went still mid-stride. "I'm required to inform you that a federal freeze order on assets connected to the Calder Family Scholarship Fund was signed this afternoon. You'll be formally contacted by counsel within the week." My father's smile didn't fully leave his face. It just stopped reaching his eyes, the practiced warmth curdling into something brittle. "This is not the place," he said quietly, glancing around to see who might have overheard. "No," I agreed. "It wasn't the place 10 years ago either, when you decided my name was yours to spend. You didn't seem too concerned about place then." He didn't answer. For the first time in my entire life, my father had nothing rehearsed to say. He looked for just a moment like a much smaller man than the one who'd race me, like all the polish had been a coat of paint over something that had been hollow for a very long time. Meredith didn't cry. Not there, not in front of the room full of people who'd come to celebrate her. But she reached over and took my hand and held it tightly the way she used to on long car rides when we were girls who hadn't yet learned how to disappoint each other, before the world taught us both different ways of being afraid of that. "I'm glad you told me," she said, so quietly only I could hear it. "Even if it ruins tonight." "It doesn't ruin tonight," I said. "Tonight was always about what you built. Nobody can take that part back." The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep, so I called Ruth, mostly just to hear a familiar voice that had nothing to do with any of it. "You should be resting, ma'am," she said, though I could tell from the background noise she was awake too, probably reviewing something she didn't need to be reviewing at that hour either. Couldn't. Kept running the statement in my head. I keep wondering if I'm making this bigger than it needs to be. It's fraud, Ruth. People commit fraud. It happens every day, in every branch, to people who never asked for a helicopter to prove a point. "Well, respect, ma'am, it's not really about the fraud." Ruth's voice was careful, the way it always is when she's about to say something more honest than her rank technically allows. "I've read the file. I know it's not my place, but it's not really about the money, is it? It's about 25 years of people deciding what you were worth without ever once asking you." I didn't say anything for a moment. Outside my window, the base was quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists on a post at 2 in the morning when even the duty officers move a little slower. "When did you get so good at this?" I finally said. "I had a good example, ma'am." A pause. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow, you get to say the thing you've been carrying for a long time. That's not nothing." She was right, of course. Ruth usually is. I put the phone down, and for the first time in weeks, sleep came without much of a fight. The preliminary presentation before the assistant U.S. attorney took place in a room with none of the drama people imagine when they picture federal proceedings. Beige walls, humming fluorescent light, folding chairs, no audience, just the machinery of law moving carefully, unglamorously forward. I'd expected, somehow, to feel something cinematic walking in. Instead, I felt the way I used to feel before a routine audit. Focused, a little tired, ready to let the facts do what facts do. My father sat across the room flanked by 2 attorneys in matching charcoal suits, his posture immaculate, like posture alone might still save him. My mother wasn't present. I later learned she'd refused to come, telling Meredith on the phone that she couldn't sit through watching her family be dismantled in a government building. Meredith came anyway, without her. She sat 2 rows back, hands folded so tightly in her lap her knuckles had gone pale, dressed simply, no makeup, like she deliberately stripped away every version of herself that might have looked like performance. Naomi squeezed my arm once before we sat down. "You don't have to say anything today if you don't want to. The exhibits do most of the talking." "I want to say something," I told her. "I've been quiet in this family for 25 years. I'm done being quiet in the one room that's actually listening." The assistant U.S. attorney, a composed woman named Renata Okafor, opened the proceeding with the flat clarity of someone who has done this 100 times and still takes it seriously. "This session will determine whether sufficient cause exists to refer formal charges to a federal grand jury regarding allegations of identity fraud, unauthorized computer access, and financial misconduct involving Department of Defense adjacent contracts. General Calder, Ms. Cross, you may proceed." Naomi stood first, calm, deliberate. Between 2018 and 2023, Walter Calder knowingly used his daughter's forged authority, a power of attorney whose scope he unlawfully expanded, and a digital signature unlawfully replayed from prior legitimate documents to authorize a series of fraudulent vendor agreements with Anchor Point Logistics Group. These agreements moot federal contract funds through structured transactions designed to evade mandatory audit thresholds. She submitted the exhibits one by one. The forged amendment, the metadata proving backdating Prius testimony, transcribed and sworn, then the audio recording. Marcus had obtained it through a subpoenaed voicemail archive, my father's voice, from a call to Anchor Point's original account manager in 2019, explaining why the authorization didn't need to come from me directly. "She's deployed. Doesn't need to be bothered with this. I hold power of attorney. She trusts me completely." Hearing it in that room, flat and undeniable, did something strange to my chest. Not surprise, just confirmation, landing heavier than I expected, the way a verdict lands heavier than the trial that led to it even when you already knew what was coming. My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch outwardly. He'd had a lifetime of practice not flinching in rooms full of people forming judgments about him. One of his attorneys leaned over to whisper something. He shook his head slightly, almost imperceptibly, like whatever strategy remained available to him no longer seemed worth the effort. Renata Okafor made a note, unhurried. Ms. Cross, does the General's Counsel wish to enter any additional context regarding the deployment records referenced in that recording? Naomi stood again. We do. General Calder's official deployment logs, verified by the Department of Defense records custodian, confirm she was stationed in Eastern Europe during the entire period referenced in that call. She had no access to a secure line capable of authorizing domestic financial transactions during that window. The claim made in that recording, that she trusted her father to act as her proxy, was never something she consented to. She was, quite literally, on the other side of the world, unaware any of this was occurring. I watched my father's attorneys exchange a look. It was the look of people recalculating. Naomi placed the final document on the table. This exhibit shows the educational trust account opened in 2018, listing Meredith Calder as beneficiary. Meredith's breath caught audibly behind me. What? Her voice cracked on the single word. I never signed anything. You wouldn't have, Naomi said gently, turning toward her. You were 17. The account was guardian managed. You were positioned, whether you knew it or not, as both a beneficiary and a shield, someone whose presence in the paperwork made it look like a family matter, not a federal crime. The assistant U.S. attorney turned to me. General Calder, would you like to make a statement? I stood. I served overseas while this was happening, I said. My voice didn't shake, though I'd half expected it to. Eastern Europe, North Africa, 2 tours in Afghanistan. I came home each time to the same silence. No one in my family ever asked what I'd carried back with me, what I'd seen, what any of it cost. But somebody was more than happy to use what I'd earned while I wasn't looking. I came home to find debt in my name, contracts I never signed, and a family that only spoke my name when it was useful to them, not when I needed them. Only when they needed something my name could buy on their behalf. I paused, letting the room settle, letting myself find the next sentence instead of rushing past it. I want to be careful here, because this isn't a story about a whole family failing me. My sister is a victim in this room too, in a different way than I am, and I don't want anything I say to suggest otherwise. This is about one man who decided at some point that my absence made my name available, that the years I spent gone were years he was entitled to spend on my behalf without asking. I looked briefly at Meredith, whose eyes were wet and fixed on the floor. She looked up at that, just for a second, and something passed between us that didn't need words. I'm not angry at everyone in this room, I said, but I need the record to reflect the truth because I've spent 25 years earning a name I didn't get to keep for myself. I'd like it back. I sat down. The room was very quiet. Naomi closed her folder gently, like even she understood the moment deserved a little more silence before the machinery of the hearing started moving again. The Department of Defense has independently verified General Calder's deployment logs for the relevant periods, she added, once enough time had passed. She had no physical or legal access to domestic financial systems during the windows in which these authorizations occurred. The record should reflect that clearly and permanently. Okafor folded her hands. This matter will be referred to a federal grand jury for indictment review. All parties are instructed not to discuss these proceedings publicly until that process concludes. The gavel-adjacent finality of a stamped folder closing is quieter than television makes it look. Chairs scraped. People stood. My father remained seated a moment longer than everyone else, looking not at me but somewhere past me, the way a man looks at something that has already stopped belonging to him. Meredith caught up to me in the hallway outside. She didn't say anything at first. She just put her hand over mine, the way she had at the gala. How long did you know? She asked quietly. About the account, about me being in it. Since the day after the helicopter, I said. I didn't tell you right away because I needed to be sure you weren't part of it before I let myself be angry at the right person. And now? Now I know exactly who to be angry at, and it was never you. She exhaled, shoulders dropping like she'd been holding that question in her whole body for 2 weeks. I keep thinking about that scholarship money, she whispered, about every time I thanked him for it at a dinner party like he built something instead of stolen it. You didn't know, I said. That's not a debt you owe anyone. 2 weeks after the grand jury convened, the indictment came down. 4 federal counts: aggravated identity theft, unauthorized access to a protected computer system, wire fraud through structured transactions, and fraudulent procurement involving a defense-adjacent contractor. My father's personal and business assets north of $15 million in combined holdings were frozen pending forfeiture proceedings. Within a month, his name was quietly removed from 2 hospital advisory boards, an alumni foundation, and a regional investment partnership that had once used his photograph in its annual report. The scholarship fund that had helped pay Meredith's tuition was placed under independent trustee review. Eventually, most of it was found to be legitimate money earned honestly decades earlier, though the discovery came with its own strange grief. Meredith later told me she almost wished it had all been dirty, because at least then, the shape of the betrayal would have been simple. My mother stopped speaking to me for a while after the indictment, not out of anger exactly. Or not only that, I think, mostly, she didn't know what version of herself to be in a world where the story she'd told for 30 years about a devoted husband and 2 daughters who'd simply chosen different paths no longer held together. Meredith told me she called sometimes, late at night, wanting to talk about anything except the case. I didn't push. Some doors take longer to open than others, and I'd learned, the hard way, not to force any of them. I didn't do a single interview. Naomi asked more than once if I wanted to go public. There was interest, she said, from outlets that cover military fraud cases. Producers who wanted to make me a symbol of something tidy and inspirational for a segment between commercial breaks. I turned all of it down. I hadn't survived 25 years of silence just to trade it for a different kind of noise, one that wasn't mine to control either. I did agree to one thing, a short, written piece for an internal Army publication that circulates among finance officers and legal personnel, aimed at nobody except the people most likely to end up exactly where I had. I wrote about limited powers of attorney, about how easily a document meant to protect a deploying soldier's life back home can be twisted into a weapon against them if nobody ever checks its expiration date. I wrote about signature replay attacks, about the importance of biometric confirmation protocols that don't rely on paper trails alone. I wrote too about the particular danger of trusting a family member simply because they are family, how proximity isn't the same thing as safety, and how the people best positioned to protect us are, by the same logic, the people best positioned to hurt us if they choose to. I wanted something useful to survive this, something other than my own exhaustion, sitting quietly in a drawer somewhere. 3 months later, I stood beneath the high echoing dome of the Pentagon's Hall of Honor, rows of polished shoes and formal blues arranged around me. A Legion of Merit pinned above my heart for what the citation carefully called sustained integrity under compromised institutional trust. Army language for you got robbed by your own father and still did your job without letting it break you in front of anyone who was watching. When I stepped up to the small podium, I didn't talk about deployments or medals, or what it costs a person to come home and find their name broken open like a safe somebody else had the combination to. I am not the legacy of a man who spent my silence like it was his to spend, I said. For a long time, I thought being quiet was the same thing as being strong, that if I just kept my head down and did the work, eventually somebody would notice without my having to ask them to. I've since learned those are 2 different things. Silence can be strength, but only if you're the one choosing it. When someone else uses your silence for their own purposes, that's not strength anymore. That's theft. Wearing strength's clothing. I am the one who stayed standing when the world assumed I'd disappear quietly. Today, I'm not asking anyone in this room to feel sorry for that. I'm not interested in being anyone's cautionary tale or anyone's inspiration story either, if I'm honest. I'm just telling you it happened plainly without dressing it up, because the record deserves to be correct, and because somewhere out there, some other soldier is sitting on a limited power of attorney they signed in a hurry the night before a deployment, trusting the wrong assumption about what that piece of paper could and couldn't be turned into. If telling the story helps even one of them ask a better question before they sign, then the telling was worth it. In the front row, Meredith sat beside Ruth Alvarez, who had somehow become something between a colleague and family in the space of one very long season. The 2 of them had struck up an unlikely friendship over the past months, bonding, of all things, over a shared distrust of hospital cafeteria coffee. Meredith didn't cry, she didn't need to. She just watched me the entire time, hands folded in her lap, chin lifted the way mine probably was too. Some genetic inheritance neither of us had asked for, but both of us apparently shared. When I stepped down, she stood and hugged me in front of everyone, which was its own kind of statement given how carefully our family had always avoided anything that looked like public feeling. You could have warned me you were going to make me cry in front of the Secretary of the Army, she murmured against my shoulder. I didn't make you cry, I said. You're not even crying. Give it a minute, she was right. It took about 4 seconds. I held on to her a little longer than either of us probably expected, and neither of us let go first. Afterward, in the reception line, Marcus found me near the refreshment table, 2 glasses of sparkling cider in hand. Neither of us drinks on duty, even for ceremonies. You did good today, he said, handing me one. Better than good, I've sat through a lot of these ceremonies. Most people use the podium to talk about themselves. You used it to talk about the next person who might need the warning. Old habit, I said. Finance Corps doesn't let you forget that the mission is bigger than the moment. He clinked his glass against mine. To the next person who reads the fine print before they sign. To that, I agreed. That night, back in my quarters, I opened the wooden box I keep on the top shelf of my closet. The one with my earliest citations, the ones from the deployment nobody talks about anymore. A faded photograph of my old unit standing in front of a transport plane, most of us barely older than kids, none of us knowing yet what the next 2 decades would cost or give us. I set the new medal down beside the old photograph and sat there for a while, not doing anything in particular, just breathing. My phone buzzed once. A text from Meredith, a photo from the ceremony, both of us mid-loft, caught by someone else's camera without either of us noticing. Underneath it, she'd written, "Dinner next week? Just us, no agenda." I found myself smiling at the screen longer than the message probably warranted. Some wars aren't fought with weapons. Some victories don't come with headlines or applause or anyone standing up to cheer. Sometimes justice arrives quietly in a folder full of dates and signatures, in a whiteboard covered with arrows, in a sister's hand closing over yours, in a hallway outside a room with beige walls, in a text message that simply says no agenda after years of every family gathering having one. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it arrives loudly, with the roar of rotor blades cutting across a morning that was never supposed to be about you, just to prove once and for all that it always was. I closed the box. I turned off the light. For the first time in longer than I could easily remember, the silence in the room didn't feel like something I was enduring. It felt like something I had finally, fully earned. Mine to keep, mine to spend, mine to share only with the people who had proven they deserved it. Tomorrow, there would be another briefing, another audit, another quiet Tuesday spent doing work. Nobody photographs. That was fine. That had always been fine. I had simply, finally, stopped needing anyone else to notice in order to know it mattered.